Congressman, thank you for sitting down with us.
Thanks.
I think we've covered the basics of chips, so I'll kind of pick up the conversation where we ended. And one question I had is, whenever we have these big government incentive and assistance programs, there's always a concern that the bucket is going to leak, right? How do we ensure that every dollar that the government is giving these companies is making an impact on the ground and accomplishing the goals that they're meant to accomplish?
Yes, that's a great question. We put safeguards in the bill to make sure that the monies through the grant program would go to the intended purpose. I think the tax incentives are probably more important, to be honest with you, in terms of long-term certainty for the manufacturer of semiconductors. As you know, semiconductors are the brain behind everything in our lives. And this idea came after with COVID, we saw supply chain being a real issue. And that being medical, out of China particularly, rare earth minerals, and then semiconductors. I was approached by the previous administration to look at a way to incentivize manufacturing of semiconductors in the United States rather than in China or in countries vulnerable to China like Taiwan. Taiwan now manufactures 90% of the advanced global semiconductor supply. That's a problem. So we need to pull that supply chain out and either build it in the United States or with our allied partners. It's a national security issue, particularly as we look at Taiwan being in the bullseye of Chairman Xi and China. As we saw Putin invade Ukraine, Chairman Xi now is looking at Taiwan and the Pacific. This is all really coming together, and I think this will have a generational, transformational impact in the United States. Going back in Austin, it's nothing new. In 1987, then President Ronald Reagan worked with Admiral Emmons, who's still around here in Austin, to get Sematech working. DARPA, that's our defense, basically research arm, coming to Austin to work on technology. So I see this as an extension and really putting it on steroids. And Texas and Austin particularly is such a great place for this. We're already seeing, I think, to answer your question, the benefits. And the Secretary of Commerce, the Undersecretary is here today, has told me Texas will probably benefit more than any other state. And we're seeing that with Samsung, over $200 billion investment, Texas Instruments. We know the Austin area is going to benefit hugely from this. And then lastly, one thing I put in the bill was a National Semiconductor Technology Center. We're seeing the University of Texas and Texas A&M, not always partners, not on the football field, but here in Austin working together for this center to take place right here in Texas. And that's why we were making such a strong pitch to the secretary today.
One of the downsides, maybe one of the only downsides of that generational change that you described is often it can take a generation, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, the way that these companies were describing the way that they need to beef up our infrastructure here, it's going to take a long time. Do you worry that in terms of China's threat to Taiwan, our current semiconductor supply chain is going to be disrupted before we can see the full impact of chips?
It depends on China's timetable if they decide to invade, quite honestly. And that's why, I would urge lawmakers, tell them why this was urgent, why we needed to pass it right away. We finally did get it passed, thank God. But I think that was the whole mindset was this is a national security issue. Time is not on our side. It takes about 2 years to build one of these fabrication centers. We're seeing that in Taylor, just north of here in Austin, a massive fabrication plant being built. And it'll probably be finished in about a year and a half. So we have to do we have to do it now. But we're seeing massive investments now in the United States, which brings not only capital investment to the United States, but the jobs in manufacturing. In the past, we've seen this go offshore to places like Taiwan because it was cheaper. There's no capital investment, and the workforce was cheaper in Taiwan. We're trying to change that shift now back to the United States, so we manufacture here rather than overseas.
What is the latest intelligence regarding the timetable of China's prospects for potentially invading Taiwan? Is that something that could happen any day, any year? How concerned are you about that in the short term?
Well, I do think this alliance between Russia and China and Iran and North Korea is very disturbing. I think Chairman Xi, if I had to calculate, is looking for option A would be an easier way to do this, sort of like in Hong Kong, to take it over without a shot fired. How could he do that? By influencing the election that will take place next January of 2024. That's, I think, going to be their first attempt. If they fail, then I think Plan B would be a blockade or some sort of military style invasion. And that's when the chips become very important, because if, God forbid, China does invade Taiwan and they own 90% of the advanced semiconductor chip manufacturing, it will put us in a world of hurt. And that was the whole premise behind the CHIPS bill. Now, TSMC, that manufactures chips in Taiwan, has expanded into Arizona since the CHIPS Act got passed, and 20% more of that will be manufactured in Arizona rather than in Taiwan. And that's a result we wanted to see, was, Micron, multi-billion-dollar investment here, Intel, Samsung, and Texas Instruments. So the bill is starting to work now. To your point, we've got a timetable here, and it's very important.
For my last couple questions, I want to pivot to state government. Texas has taken it upon itself to address some of your own concerns about China's influence in our property ownership and universities. I understand you've endorsed Senator Lois Kolkhorst's bill to ban most property ownership for many Chinese citizens. The current version of the bill exempts permanent residents and American citizens who may have dual citizenship. Is that version of the bill that you were willing to support now? Is that the right answer?
Well, and let me just say, I support the concept of what they're trying to do. I got briefings on, PRC-driven, properties being purchased next to military sites. That was concerning in terms of what the intentions were. Obviously, it was to monitor or capture, intelligence coming out of our military installations. That is a national security threat to the United States. Like anything, when you do this, my TikTok bill, you want it to be very targeted, to be either PRC owned or controlled in the area of military or intelligence or espionage. And I think if that's the focus of the bill, I think that's a good focus. I would not want to see it expanded to penalize legitimate people fleeing from China, or say Iran from 1979 revolution, or fleeing the oppression from China to be caught in this net, if you will. So that's why I think the PRC connectivity is really important. That would be the Chinese Communist Party. If they are in fact behind the acquisition of land, then that's obviously something we need to stop.
Well, so let me ask you then, Texas already has a bill on the books now that prevents companies owned or controlled partly or wholly by the Chinese government or companies based in China from connecting into our critical infrastructure, like our power grid, right? Why do we need to go a step farther and direct the similar restrictions to individuals?
I think because the land is being purchased in some cases by individuals that may be operating on behalf of the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. And that's what we are seeing with these properties bought next to military installations. I think the state legislature is trying to address that problem. Also in the agriculture sector as well. I think they're looking at that, in terms of food security. Just trying to make sure that we, again, like with the CHIPS bill, have control over our own supply chain and our own manufacturing here in the United States, not being driven or taken over by PRC-affiliated individuals owned or operated by those individuals.
Got it. Just lastly on TikTok, TikTok is kind of trying to win back its favor among American leaders. They, of course, have a office here in Austin, and they've dubbed their kind of public relations campaign Project Texas, right? So Texas and our state leaders' recent restrictions against them is on the top of their minds. Are there any assurances or changes that you would like to see within TikTok that may protect their longevity in the United States that would make you feel more comfortable with the app?
If it was owned and operated and the algorithms were all in the United States, I'd have a more comfort level. The problem is it's not. And they're conducting a charm offensive. I think you're correct. I think they know that legislators are looking at it very closely on both sides of the aisle. I know Senator Warner has a bill, looking at this issue also. I think our concern has been advocated by some of the top national security experts in this administration, both the Director of National Intelligence to the CIA Director to the FBI Director, saying that TikTok poses a national security threat, particularly to our younger generation. It's a backdoor into your phone. I would say it's a spy balloon into your phone where they can capture data, keystrokes, passwords. They can actually do algorithms to message in certain ways to use it as a propaganda tool. So it's very much a concern in the national security space. But just like with what we were talking about earlier, my bill, it's very targeted to anything owned by the Chinese Communist Party or controlled that's in the area of military espionage or intelligence. Those social media apps need to be scrutinized by the administration and sanctioned, and we give authority to the president to ban it if he deems it in the national security interest. I think that's a smart way to do it. The prior administration tried to ban it, but the courts found to not have the legal authority to do so. We give the president the legal authority if he deems it in our national security best interest. And so, it'd be great to see an American version of this come out, that there are some great innovators. I know there are, to have a TikTok-like app out there that could be as popular. And I know it's a very popular app, but it's deeply disturbing when you see the amount of damage that can be done, particularly to the younger generation. I'll say this, Congress has banned TikTok from our phones. So I cannot download the TikTok app. So why is that the case, but we are not willing to protect our children from the same threat that we know is real from China right now?
Because you may have information on your phone that we definitely don't want China to have, but the same may apply to your children, right? Or anybody's children.
And
right?
It could apply to my children specifically,
Right.
And, we had a hack of our health link just recently. We don't know where that came from, is either Russia or China. And they got not only my identifiers, but my children's identifying, social security numbers, birthdays, all that sort of thing. So it's really protecting our children from this threat. And they may not understand it or see it, but I do trust our national security community, who almost unanimously have said this is a real threat. Yeah. And we banned it from Congress. Why is it? Why are we doing that? And we've seen the governor of Texas take steps to ban it. We've seen University of Texas has banned it. Texas A&M has banned it for a reason. I think that's good enough for me that we should protect our own children from the threat that we're protecting ourselves from.
Yeah. Just one last thing. To what extent have you been involved with the federal response to SVB and making sure that people with money in that bank are insured? Or do you agree with the federal response to secure that money?
We know there's a lot of tech. We had South by Southwest here, a lot of startup, technology companies. This was the whole Silicon Valley Bank was designed as a bank to get investments in technology. So I think it impacts the Austin area quite a bit. And I think what the FDIC did was they basically insured, as they do the depositors, but also make sure that they're made whole from any losses that may occur. And I think what Treasury is attempting to do here is stop it from being what they call a systemic problem. And they did this under the systemic risk provision in the law to prevent this from going any further. The last thing I think I want to see, or anyone else, is a 2008 scenario where we had a massive failure in our financial institutions, which required a massive bailout from the United States government.